Hi, my name is Teki Sarantakis, and I am the president of the Canada School of Public Service. At the Canada School of Public Service, we are obsessed with building a better public service and a better public servant for the future. And one of the reasons that we are obsessed with this is because our world is changing quickly. Our world is marked by disruption. And as a civil servant in Canada's public service, you need to understand that you live in a world that's marked by disruption. Please join me for a few minutes of kind of old man wisdom on what it means to live in the age of disruption. Disruption just means change, but it's a particular type of change. It's a change that's so dramatic and so rapid that it dislodges the current equilibrium. And that's what we're living right now. And I want to illustrate this in a few different ways. So I'm going to show you some pictures of some things. So that's a lot of you might know what that is, but depending on your age, you might not know what that is. Probably you all know what this is. And some of you know what this is. Some of you kind of thought at one point this was the greatest thing on earth, and some of you kind of scratching your heads going, what is that thing? This is a Morse code transmitter. Now for sure you know this. This is a telephone, but it's a particular type of telephone. It is actually a landline. This is a cell phone, and this was actually, for many of us of a certain age, we remember the very first time we saw this in real life, and we remember the very first time we actually held this. And again, for those of us of a certain age in the government of Canada, this was our very first cell phone. It had a battery life of about an hour, and that was true if you didn't turn it on. Once you turned it on, it had less battery life. This is a typewriter. This is a computer. So why am I showing you all of these things? Well, they all have something in common. They have a lot of things in common, actually. Number one, they're more or less museum pieces. And what I mean by that is they're things that we don't really use anymore. We don't really see them anymore, except in museums and in a few kind of workplaces. But really, what they fundamentally have in common is that they were, in their time, world-leading technologies. These were not toys. These were business and personal tools that we could not imagine living without. They were not fads. They were things that ran the world. And for a few of them, a couple of years later, they're gone. They are completely irrelevant. They're museum pieces. So what this speaks to about the importance of disruption is that disruption is not about incompetence. It's about irrelevance. These things, the typewriter, the computer, the cell phone, the landline, they didn't get worse. They actually got better. And they got better and better and better and better, but they're irrelevant. So if you spent your life making a better landline, if you spent your life making a better CD player, you did absolutely nothing wrong. You were getting better and better and better at what you did. But the world just kind of passed you by. The world just kind of said, you know what, that really is a terrific landline, but I'm not interested in landlines anymore. So it became irrelevant. And that's really important to remember, that you could be the best at what you do, but if what you do gets passed by, you become irrelevant. What are some of the things that you live with right now that you can't imagine in the future living without? For some of us, it's a credit card. For some of us, it's an iPhone. For some of us, including myself, it's an Amazon account. For others, again, including myself, it's access to Google. For some people, it's a steering wheel. They can't imagine a world without a steering wheel. But guess what? A lot of these things are actually leaving us. And today, we can't imagine our world without these things. But digital currency is coming to wipe out credit cards. Jeff Bezos always tells his employees, we're still at day one. We're at risk of going bankrupt and we have to keep innovating. Otherwise, we're going to become a dinosaur. Google is terrified of things like privacy or things like, duck, duck, goose or go, duck or things like that, because they can imagine one day that they will become irrelevant. And Google started off in roughly 1997 as a commercial search engine. And over time, we rely on it less and less because Google is a general search engine. But if you want to find videos, probably don't go to Google. You probably go to YouTube. If you want to find something to buy, you probably don't go to Google. You probably go to Amazon. If you want to find your friends, you probably don't go to Google. You probably go to Facebook. So specialized search is something that could eliminate Google going forward in the future. And the steering wheel. How could we think about life without a steering wheel? Well, it's coming, and it's probably coming in our lifetime. And in fact, it will probably be dangerous in some point in the future to have a car with a steering wheel, because that means that the human being can take control, and the human being will become less and less apt to do things safely as computers and automation and processing gets better and better. So the second thing we want to talk about is giants. And these are some of the giants of the recent past, the General Motors and the Chryslers and the CBSs, and they were always going to last forever, right? Like we couldn't imagine a world without, the big three automakers or the big three television networks, but they're not our giants anymore. These are today's giants. These are the Spotify's and the Netflixes and the Googles and the Twitters and the Instagrams and the Microsofts and the Ubers and the on and on and on and on. These are the giants. And these are not only the giants, but they're the digital giants. And they have a few things in common. If you ask yourself, how did they get so big so fast? The answer is because they were digital. For General Motors or Ford or Chrysler to become really big, they needed analog things. They needed physical things. They needed to build plants. They needed to buy steel. They needed to buy aluminum. They needed distribution networks. They needed trucks. They needed glass. They needed. All those things take time, and all those things are what are called exclusionary goods. If I buy a piece of steel, it's mine. I have it. But there's a different type of good, which is a digital good. And a digital good scales really, really quickly. A digital good is cheap. A digital good is replicatable. I can make 10,000 copies of a piece of software like that. I can't make 10,000 cars like that. I can make 10,000 cars if I really wanted to, but I couldn't do it really quickly. And to illustrate this, this is the first global headquarters of Amazon. And this is like 1995, 1996. That's roughly when I joined the government of Canada. When I joined the government of Canada, this was the global headquarters for Amazon. And now Amazon is the everything store in one generation. But Amazon actually isn't even really that big. It's massive on an absolute sense, but it's relatively small in a comparative sense. This is the world headquarters for Alibaba. Alibaba is kind of the Chinese equivalent to Amazon, and it is about 5 times the size of Amazon. Think about that for a moment. 5 times the size of Amazon. And there are all these other companies that you don't really know right now, but they're coming. And they're called Tencent, and they're called Ant, and they're called Huawei. And so even Amazon, which we kind of think of as the ultimate epitome of kind of innovation and success, they're looking at that and going, oh my God, there's all this stuff coming. Who's coming next? Another big feature of disruption is that it's changed the relationship between the consumer and companies. Historically, companies had all the power because they had three things that we didn't have. They had information, they had price, and they had location. But now we have information, price, and we have location. How do we have it? Because of this thing, because we now have access to real-time data on a mobile setting that before we didn't have. If you wanted to know in the past, what was the price of commercial real estate in Edmonton, you had to kind of go and do some digging. You had to hire a broker, and you had to, and you had to, and you had to. Now you just kind of say, click, 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 and you get the answer. So, lesson number 2 is don't get too complacent. If you think you've won, you're probably on the way to losing. What you want to think instead is that I haven't won, but right now I'm winning. And in a couple of minutes, I might not be winning. And in the government of Canada, we tend to get kind of complacent because we kind of say, well, we did that. We solved that problem. Go away. But it's not about solving a problem and going away. It's about constantly getting better because something else is coming. Simon Sinek, who's a really interesting thinker, calls this the infinite race. Think of yourself as being in an infinite race, a race that never ends. Another thing that's really important about digital and disruption is the platform economy. And what's a platform? A platform is simply something that you build on top of. And in the past, what's interesting in an economy, and these are Canadian examples, but they're true around a lot of the world, you kind of had 2 or 3 big players, and then everybody else was small. So kind of in food, you had like McDonald's and Burger King. In colas, you had Coca-Cola and Pepsi. In beer, you had Canadian and Blue, and on and on and on. And you could be really number 2 or number 3 or number 4 in any given market, and you could still make a living. But what's interesting about the platform economy is if you're number 2 to Facebook, who are you? If you're number 2 to Instagram, who are you? If you're number 2 to Airbnb, who are you? The answer is you're probably not much. So, one of the things that's really interesting about the new economy is that the winner takes virtually all. And that's why you see companies striving and driving for data. That's why you see them striving and diving for market share and for eyeballs. And that's why you don't see profits being a big consideration for a long, long time. Because once you get to number 1, then you start making a lot of money. You can crank it out really, really quickly. But having, the number 2 social media platform for connecting with friends after Facebook, who's number 2? I don't know. Do you know? Nobody knows. Nobody knows because nobody cares. If you want any of these services, you go to like the leader. And that is very different from the economy in the past. So remember that as you go forward and live in the disruptive economy. Another important thing about disruption is what's happened is it's kind of distorted our sense of time. And as human beings, we have this very funny relationship with time. And I love this quote from Bill Gates, because Bill Gates says that we overestimate what we can do in 1 year and we underestimate what we can do in 10 years. So think about that as you apply that to your life in terms of investing or working out or eating. We all are obsessed with the 1 year, and we say, every kind of January 1st, we're going to do, here are our resolutions and here's what we're going to do this year. And that's exactly the wrong way to think. We should be thinking what's going to happen in 10 years as opposed to what's going to happen in the next year. But our human brain has trouble doing that. But the other thing that's happening with our human brain is we're starting to get a warped sense of time, because the smartphone, again, this mobile computer that we all carry around, this mobile connected computer that we all carry around in our pockets, it's giving us a pre-smartphone sense of time and a post-smartphone sense of time. Basically, it's making us impatient. Basically, it's saying to us, we don't really have time to wait anymore. And what does this sense of time mean if you're a student or you're a professional or you're a company or you're a government or you're a public servant? It means you have to work differently. You have to work faster. And not only that, you have to get people's attention faster. This is a goldfish. The attention span of the average goldfish, for people who study these things, we're told it's about 9 seconds. If you can't capture the imagination of the goldfish in 9 seconds, the goldfish will move on. Well, the attention span of the average human being now, apparently, from people who measure these things, is down to 8 seconds. So you now are living, working in a world where you have less time than the attention span of a goldfish to communicate what you're trying to communicate. So time is different now. Think about that and remember that, because working at the speed of government 10 years ago was great 10 years ago. It is not great now, and it will not be great 10 years from now. It will actually be a lot worse. Obviously, data is the big driver in the disruption. And data is being generated every moment of every day. And it's being generated in huge numbers every single minute of every single day. 5 million Google searches, 1.4 million Tinder searches, over 1 million videos. Data. Look at this. You have the human genome. A few years ago, in 2003, it cost $2.7 billion to map the human genome. A few years later, that went from $2.7 billion to $300,000. It went from something that in 2003 could only be done by a very rich country to something that could be done by a company. And then a few years later, it went to something that could be done by a company to something that could be done by a person. And now in 2021, it can be done not by a very rich country, not by a very rich company, but by a high school student. It's under $100. You look at Spotify, you look at Netflix, you look at Amazon, and you're like, oh, music, movies, stuff. But they're not music, movies, and stuff. They're about data. They're just the data, the way they apply the data is to music, movies, and stuff. But they're really data companies. Data is everywhere. A glass of water is full of data. A glass of water tells you, if you know what you're doing, it tells somebody where you live, because it's composed of minerals. It's composed of chlorine. It's composed of fluoride. And it can tell you where you live. This is the other side of the glass of water, and that's got even more data. In fact, if you know how to read the data that comes out of here, you can even tell somebody when they're going to die, and that's pretty powerful stuff. But you look at this and you go, Spotify, Netflix, Amazon, yeah, I get it, but that's not the real world. Well, here's where data goes in the real world. There is no industry that is more data infused than modern agriculture. In modern agriculture, data tells you when to plant, it tells you when to water, when to seed, when to harvest, how much to plant, when satellites talking to tractors, talking to combines, talking to it is data, 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 data. And that's agriculture. And so, lesson number 5 in the age of disruption is that the new world is all about actionable real time data. And note that I said actionable real time data. A lot of us think that we have data, but if it's not real time, it's not that big a deal sometimes. If you're battling a pandemic and your data is from 3 months ago, you could go, oh, that's wonderful. I have all this data. You don't have data. You actually have something worse. You have misinformation. You have something that's telling you the wrong thing. Data also has to be actionable. If you're like collecting data and spending all this time and money to collect data and you don't actually do anything with it, you probably shouldn't be collecting. You should probably shouldn't be spending all that time and money collecting data. The second last thing I'll talk about is kind of the value add. In the world, we all kind of find ourselves in one of these 4 buckets. We're either labor, we're craft, we're skilled labor, or we're a profession. But labor is changing now. Labor is now playing in a global pond. Where you live matters a lot less than what you do and how you do it. If you live in Brampton, Ontario, or in Ottawa, Ontario, or in Toronto, Ontario, you used to compete with people that lived in Brampton, Ontario, in Toronto, Ontario, and in Ottawa, Ontario. Now you compete with the whole world, the whole world. You're competing with people in Shanghai, you're competing with people in Mexico City, you're competing with people in India, in Bangladesh, in Vietnam, in the Philippines, in the United States, everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. You have to find a value add, or else you're in a lot of trouble. And that's our next lesson, the value add. And I like to think of this in a couple of ways. And my favorite analogy for your value add is, what do you bring to the table? And you look at like a restaurant like this, and there's wine, there's food, there's the experience, there's the decor, there's the lighting, there's the ambiance, there's the sound. Something is bringing something to the table. And you look at a kind of a less upscale restaurant, they're still full of people, but so that means something is bringing something to the table, whether it's price or value or really good food or convenience or location. Even at the lowest level of kind of the dining, the kind of the classic, fast food, McDonald's brings a lot to the table. It brings convenience, it brings price, it lets you have your little kids run around, it brings value, it brings entertainment. What's your value add? What are you bringing to the table? In the age of disruption, it is critical that you bring something that nobody else brings to the table. Embrace chaos. The US military has a really nice way of remembering chaos. They call it VUCA. And VUCA is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Remember that. If you remember VUCA, you will remember that the world isn't static. You will remember that the world doesn't have rules. You will remember that you have to constantly change. This is the world we used to work in before. The one would dictate to the two, and the two would dictate to the four, and on and on and on. It was ordered, it was structured. This is the world we live in now. There are relationships, there are interactions, there are things that we can't even see. In the past, you would kind of go, who's in charge? And it'd be like, there's the org chart. Now it's everywhere. This is the world you have to navigate. And in a world where you have to navigate, your one competitive advantage is your capacity to learn faster than the person beside you. The moment you stop learning is the moment you start falling behind. Think about that. We spend a lifetime going to school, another half lifetime going to a university, and then we're kind of like, I'm done. I'm finished. I've learned. That's exactly the way to become irrelevant. That's exactly the way to become the fax machine and the typewriter. And you don't want to become a fax machine or a typewriter. The best way to make sure that you don't become irrelevant is that you stay curious, ask questions, read, talk to smart people, talk to people you admire, ask why. And if you do those things, you will thrive in the age of disruption. Thank you for listening to the babbles of an old man. And I wish you nothing but success as you navigate the age of disruption. Thank you very much.